like most teachers, it was 3 months in advance. I thought I've got plenty of time to plan this. And then 2 weeks ago, I thought I better start. So luckily, I've got lots and lots of things I can put together. So I'm going to share my screen and then get started. I'll try and make as much time for you to ask questions. And I think, Kayleigh, you're going to keep an eye on the chat as well, aren't you? So I did have a run through this morning, make sure I shared my screen properly, because I'm more of a Zoom person. So this should work, hopefully. But that's it, I think. So I'm kind of hoping you can see my screen now. It should say curriculum with a few wires there.
All good. We can all see it.
Does that make sense? Good, good. Thank you. So, is it still? Can you still see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, yeah, I'll use quite a lot of imagery and analogies tonight, because I think they're really quite useful. Because as that picture suggests, curriculums can get really quite messy, and it's, to me, curriculums start life like that, with wires and bits and loads of things happening, but it does need some order, and it does need some structure, so we all know what we're doing, we all know where we're going, and then the students or pupils or delegates, wherever you come from in your world, can understand what you're trying to get across. So I'll just give you a bit more of an information about me, not too much. So on Lee Pace, it says there, I've done a little bit about me on the next page, just so you kind of, that's it. So we're part of the Creative Learning Partnership Trust. It's a trust I really, really like working for, actually. Very forward thinking, give each school lots of autonomy, that helps. But we also, excuse me, share a lot of practice. I'm really lucky as well, because my daughter Millie attends my school. I don't know if she thinks that's lucky, but we're in a middle school, so we go from year 5 to year 8, and she's in year 8 at the moment. So she's one of the sort of grown-ups in the pupil world. I do a lot of support for other schools. So I'm supporting a school at the moment, and they want a curriculum. They want a curriculum yesterday. I don't think it always kind of works like that. The other little project I've got is I'm working on a well-being book with someone you can look up as well on LinkedIn, Pet the Poet. I think his name's just David Anderson on LinkedIn. But we're doing quite a lot of work together. I've known Dave for 20 years. I always share, my staff laugh at me because I can't do a presentation without mentioning Professor Brian Cox, because I think he's amazing. It's just, he absolutely mesmerizes me. And one of the reasons is, a few years back when I started teaching, in 2002, I started to teach. And I think I was watching one of his documentaries, 2006, and he was talking about stars and how eventually the universe will sort of burn out. And I got like tingles down my back, and I thought, that's how I want my students to feel when they're learning about algebra. It's a high expectation of myself and them, but I think just the way he presents learning is incredible. And I love train spotting. I don't know why, my dad was one, and I always tell people I just wanted to be the cool member of a gang, and I finally found a gang where I am, which are quite cool. And I've run 11 marathons, so yeah, I get busy. I keep myself very, very busy. Okay, where I'm coming from really is I lead 12 subject leaders. So that's my role as a curriculum leader. I lead 12 subject leaders. I monitor performance across the school, lead innovation, and I put there develop pedagogy, because pedagogy is I'm really passionate about, and I think too often we separate the curriculum from the pedagogy, and it's really important those two are sort of interlinked all the time. And I'm also the strategic lead for assessment. I don't find that quite as exciting, to be honest, but it's really important. Assessment's deeply embedded into curriculum as well. I don't know where you come from in your curriculums or your training. Everybody's in a different place. Everybody's in a different place, and like I said, that school I'm working at the moment. I don't. One of the things I won't be talking about today, unless you ask, is Ofsted. So if you're a UK school or UK provider of training, or you'll have an inspectorate of some sort. I noticed somebody came in from the NHS as an CQ something, CQ see. I think they have, in my head, that's their Ofsted. Everybody comes from a different place. Where I come from today is really that strategic overview of curriculum and how you decide what kind of knowledge and what a curriculum might look like. But a bit more context really. The other day I'm moving house, and I'm hopefully moving in next weekend. So I thought, right, I need to get some stuff. And I went into Dunelm. So if you from the UK, you'll know Dunelm. It's like a furniture. It sells towels and stuff like that. And I was just completely overwhelmed. And the honest truth, I came out with 30 coat hangers and 3 candles. And it was just the worst shopping experience I've ever had. But I do think when you're starting a curriculum, that's how it can sometimes start. Where do I start? There's all this stuff. I want the children to learn this. I want the students to learn this. We can't learn everything the same way. I can't learn Dunham. I can't buy stuff. So I'm thinking, really, what I needed to do is be a bit more strategic. That isn't an overview of my current house, actually. But what I should have done, I should have sort of split it up into bits and thought, right, what do I need for the bathroom? What do I need for this bedroom? What do I need for the kitchen? And the curriculum's a bit like that. You might take each subject, or you might take each concept, or you might take each idea and say, what is it I need for this, rather than thinking, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. And I find that a lot in schools. I just don't know where to start. So the school I'm working at the moment, we're starting with reading. So we're just saying, right, let's just look at reading, and then we can see how we can upscale that idea to geography or to history. Because in my world, I live in a world of subjects and things like that. So yeah, but equally importantly, as that, that overview of house sort of sees, it's important that these subjects, these rooms, are interlinked as well. So I never want to lose sight of that. How we do that's open to debate. My philosophy is really simple. I don't think there's a right or wrong way of building a curriculum. I have my way, and I'm quite passionate about his, but I'm always prepared to change my mind. And I think if you see my LinkedIn posts, sometimes I'm attacking my own work because I think it's really important to always self-reflect. But I think it's important to be evidence-informed rather than just say, well, that's a nice idea, I'm just going to do it. I also come from the idea of, I like how the curriculum I've put in place in my school is we learn a lot about a little. So, if, for example, I give you the idea, we do ancient Greece, and there's so much you could learn, but in the end, we've got 10 lessons. So we really focus on Athens and Sparta, and we talk about the different cultures that they promoted. The sad thing is we don't really talk about temples or gods, and everybody wants to talk about temples and gods. But I think it's important, if we want some depth of learning and want the learning to stick, that's my philosophy, a lot about a little. However, I have put there usually. If you're a Key Stage 2 teacher, you'll know that when you're in Year 6 and you're preparing for SATs, you can't really do a lot about a little. You have to do a little about a lot. There's so much in there you have to do. And also on our curriculum in PE, we don't do lots of the same, we don't do lots and lots of football. We don't do lots and lots of cricket. We do quite a little about a lot. And one of the philosophies behind that and why we do that is because we want our students to find something they love that we hope they'll carry on beyond the school. So we try and give them such a really, really varied diet, particularly in PE. And I think it's important that I don't run PE. Our curriculum leader, Claire, runs PE, and I give her that autonomy as well. Talking of autonomy, we do have a shared approach to learning. So we follow the same templates. We use the same language. And I'll talk a bit more about that, I think, as we go on, why I do that. There's a bit more here. One of my favourite artists is Freddie Mercury. People say to me, you talk about autonomy, Lee, all of the time, but how come, all of your curriculum leaders are creating documents in exactly the same format, using exactly the same language? And, that's not autonomy. My argument is what I'm creating for them is a stage. And I love the phrase, it's a stage, not a cage. So you imagine Freddie Mercury on the stage, he still needs a stage, he still needs a sound, he still needs a microphone, he still needs the audience. It doesn't matter who the artist is, they need those things. So we have lots of things that we need, such as those templates, just so that the curriculum leaders can really shine, and hopefully then that leads to the students really shining as well. And it worked for us. I think the other thing as well is I want the maths leader talking to the English leader to develop sequencing of learning, or to develop schemes of work. They come from a completely different subject, but if they're speaking the same language, it's great for peer development as well. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of joint monitoring and things like that. So that's my idea behind that clear framework. I think the first question I want to put to you really is, starting right from the start, what is a curriculum? If you could put that into a sentence or a few words, what words would you use? So if you could put that in the chat, or if you want to put your mics on and fire away, please do. So can you still hear me okay, Kayleigh?
Yeah, all good.
So
I'll keep an eye on the chat for you later.
If you keep an eye on the chat, what is a curriculum? I've got my ideas, you might have your ideas. And just whack any ideas in. What is it? It's going to be better with my tea. If there's nothing, we can carry on. So I can't see the chat, you see, because I'm on my screen.
So we've got somebody in the chat who's put a sequence, and we've got a learning journey, who's somebody else put in the chat.
So that's somebody's already seen my PowerPoint already. Yeah, definitely, it's important to sequences, and it goes back to evidence-based. Cognitive load theory is great for sequencing, I think. It's a really good evidence base for that. So is there anything else, Kayleigh? Any other questions?
So we've got a few more. One says justification, a structured plan of learning, and then overall sequential roadmap of what an establishment intends to deliver / what a learner intends to learn and be assessed against. Yeah.
Do you know what I like that? It's something against Steve, I don't know if you said it, but a structured plan of learning.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. So loads of what people have already said. So if we go to the next slide, when people ask me what it is, well, I think there's three elements to it. I think there's the planned curriculum, which I'm going to talk about the most today, which is, I suppose, that structured plan of learning. Also that enrichment, which obviously sometimes enrichment is planned, but sometimes you think, oh, that would be a good idea to do. So you can be quite responsive with enrichment, I think. But also, and I think this comes into the teaching and learning, the pedagogy, that spontaneity. And I put Mr. Poppy there. I don't know if because I started to write this over Christmas, so I was watching Nativity with my daughter, and Mr. Poppy's just mad. I wouldn't want him as a teacher here, if I'm really, really honest, but he seems a lovely, lovely man, but he just sort of makes it up as he goes along. But I think there needs to be room for that as well. And that's important. So, I did a math lesson yesterday, and I did a card trick, because I keep doing stupid tricks for them, and they're just rubbish magic tricks. But I went home and learned a card trick. That was just part of the maths lesson. It wasn't really part of the learning, but there's always some maths behind it. So I think those three things are really important. That enrichment, the clubs, the trips, the residentials, the drop-down days, which we sometimes call them. We do like a faith and focus one we've got coming up soon. We're taking some children to Young Voices. Some of you might be familiar with that, where they go and sing with another 9,000 students. So there's loads and loads of things that really does complement like the music curriculum. And just in case you didn't know, Mr. Poppy was there. He is. And one scene in the film, he brought a donkey into the classroom because we did nativity, obviously. But I think there's room for that as well. There really is, and I think teachers need permission to be themselves in the classroom. And I think if you're familiar with researchers in education, Dylan William, one of my personal favourites, I think he's amazing, does lots of work on assessment for learning. He talks about two elements of learning. What do the students need to know? What's really important, they have to know. But what would we need to know? What we can. So what would be great just to know. So, and I think teachers have to have that freedom just to put that into lessons as well. So what I want to talk about mostly is knowledge, skills, understanding. I put blah, blah, blah there because every time we talk about that, we seem to go around in circles. So we've got a structure, what we use at our school, which I'm going to share with you. How's that curriculum built? choosing a content. I think somebody's already said that on the chat, how's content chosen, and then making it stick. How you've got a wonderful curriculum that you've built, how do you make it stick? Whether I get through all that, I don't know. Hopefully I will. So next one. That old, you know, there's always debate about what comes first, knowledge or skills, and you know, what does knowledge mean, what does skills mean? And that, to me, it's not a competition. It's not a competition. However, what I would always argue is that knowledge comes first. I believe in this, again, the research will be Daniel Willingham, and I think his book is why don't children like school, or why don't students like school? It's a great book, really good. But one of his lines is knowledge is what we think with. You can tell I'm a bit ahead of myself, because I think that's really important. If we're asking students to think, they need something in which to think with. The other thing that's been, you know, in the UK last 10 years, particularly since Michael Gove era, I won't mention him again, I promise. The idea of a knowledge-rich curriculum. It's quite unpopular, I find, on LinkedIn, that phrase, and I understand why. I do understand why. There's two things I think about when I think about a knowledge-rich curriculum. Change the words around and call it rich knowledge. But to me, a knowledge-rich curriculum means you just got to pack it with stuff and knowledge. But when you think about rich knowledge, the idea is then you've really chosen it well, you've chosen it for your students and for their context. So I like to just change the argument around. I did put on my LinkedIn post that you won't always agree with me. That's part of the debate. And the other argument I always have, people say a knowledge-rich curriculum is just regurgitating facts. I think that's rubbish. It doesn't equal regurgitating facts. Because when I think of knowledge, I think of knowledge of what, of where, of when, of who, of how, and why. So to me, knowledge and skills are fundamentally the same. So we use that word knowledge a lot in our school, not because we want to regurgitate facts, we just want to fill children's heads with facts, but we think it has a wider meaning than just facts, or we're just going to learn dates and history, or, you know, to me, I just widen the meaning. And the way we've done this, and actually this idea came from an Ofsted webinar, actually. So in our curriculum, we've embedded two types of knowledge, really, and there's some research into these, not loads. There's declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. So when we look at declarative knowledge, it's knowledge that can be verbalized. So Henry VIII had 6 wives. So to think about that then. The Battle of Hastings in 1066. It can just be verbalized. Capital London, England's London. Bicycles 2 here. A volcano has that. And we call that knowledge to know that. And we think it's really important. You know, and that's the, if you go back to Dylan Williams' idea, it's the need to know. What do they absolutely need to know? And procedural knowledge is the knowledge of how to do something, or the knowledge that's really difficult to describe because, you know, perhaps traditionally we would call it a skill. So we might need to know that a bike has pedals, but that won't help us. That won't teach us to ride it, but we need to know where the pedals are. And we call that to know how. So, you know, if you're going to decorate a room, my sister's really into interior design, even though she's also a deputy head teacher. But she needs to know what colours work together, or she's into plants at the moment. She's going to take me IKEA next week and I'm dreading it. But she needs to know how things work together. But actually, when it comes down to it, we need to know how to decorate. That's a procedural skill. The colours, that's a declarative knowledge. I need to know what colours work together. But then I need to know how to decorate and how to put the masking tape on, because I can't cut in. So that's what I do. I do cheat. And I do, you know, and when people say, what's the best analogy you can use? I go back to the bike. So if you think about all those words are just declarative knowledge. I need to know what they, you know, if I don't know what the brakes do, I won't be able to brake. So, but the procedure is riding a bike. It doesn't matter how much explanation I give someone to ride a bike, they won't be able to ride it. They need to get on it and actually do it. And the other thing I say about declarative knowledge, what I've insisted an hour curriculum, I want to know what they need to know so that they can do this. So it has a purpose. So it links the knowledge with a purpose and what they can do. And the other thing, which I think is really hard, so it's just that's just a picture from one of our geography schemes, and I think that's an arch, and I think that's a stack, and they need to know that's an arch and a stack. But actually, then they need to say, so what? What are you going to do with that knowledge? Why is it useful? And that's the procedural side of it. So that's a stack. If it's a bit low, it's a stump. So what? That we're drifting into pedagogy as well there, but it's really important. The so what is critical, but we need the what so we can do the so what. So that's how I get over that woolliness between knowledge, skills, and understanding. It's not perfect, but it works really well. It works really well in our school, and it does mean we give pupils chance to practice, but we also give them lots of chance to apply it as well. So yeah, kind of reached the end of that bit, I suppose, now. So is there any questions you've got for me? Pop them in the chat, or turn your mics on and ask away if you want to. You still there, Kayleigh?
Yeah, still there. I'll keep an eye on the chat, Lee. We've got nothing yet.
Okay. But I think particularly for curriculum planning as well, that idea of the core knowledge and then also being very specific about what you're going to do with it. I think it gets over that woolliness of knowledge, skills, and understanding.
I've got some positive feedback already in the chat, Lee.
Good.
Laura said enjoying the creativeness, and Nina, I hope you don't mind me reading this out to Lee, but I think Lee will really appreciate listening to this. So Nina said she's had a debate in the last few days regarding knowledge required to be able to do something. So they deliver apprenticeships, and some believe there needs to be a clear distinction between the two by labelling them knowledge and skills. But in actual fact, some skills require procedural knowledge to be able to demonstrate. And then she said she'll be using this term going forward, which is brilliant.
Good. Yeah, I just think it's really hard because you want things to join together, knit together, but sometimes you do have to just separate them off first, so then you could start to build it up over time. And I suppose the other example I use, if I teach maths, and if you wanted to find 4/7 of 49, some of the stuff I need to know my times tables just like that. The procedure is to divide by the denominator and then to multiply by the numerator, and then the skill of the pedagogy is to show the children why that's happening. So it just helps. I think it helps with that curriculum development. So now the next bit really is sort of building the curriculum, and I think there's two elements to building that curriculum. So you kind of, I suppose, the first bit I've talked about, that declarative knowledge, that procedural knowledge, is more the philosophy behind how we choose knowledge. But actually you have to come to a point where you choose the content, and I've called it content because I think content covers knowledge in schools. It might cover, somebody's a training provider, but what's on that curriculum, what's on that, and I go back to that structured plan of learning. What content do you need to choose, but also how is it then sequenced? I know the filing cabinet is quite a classic cliched idea, but if you imagine a filing cabinet as the entire curriculum, you might have each drawer as a subject, or each drawer as a skill, or each drawer as a concept. How do you know what goes in the drawer, and how do you organize the drawer? I'm not going to talk too much about what tonight, but you also need to think, well, how does each drawer connect together and stuff like that? That's for another webinar, I think. But it just really makes you think about how you put things in order. I think I've really gone through that. So I'm working with a school at the moment. They're doing the Romans. I love the Romans. And I always ask this question: so why are you doing the Romans? Not in a it's not a criticism. It's just a really neutral question. Why are you choosing? And often it's that subject leaders find that really hard to answer. It doesn't mean the Romans are bad, but actually we need to be invested in it. I can remember learning about the Romans back at 40 years ago now, and I really enjoyed it. But actually, I think it really needs a purpose, and I think the greater the purpose, the better chance the student has of remembering it. And I think there's a few principles you might put in place when you're thinking about choosing that content. One's the context of the school. So I'll give you an example. My school, 97% white British. Our content is full of multicultural opportunities. We've got our faith and focus. In Key Stage 3, our residentials are city breaks, so they go and see somewhere else. Our location is on the outskirts of, it's about 3 or 4 miles from Stoke-on-Trent, but we're very, very close to the Cheshire border. So there's lots of things we have to give our students our experience of what it might be like to live in a city. The other thing we have to think about is, and particularly in PSHE, because we're very near to our county lines, their safety, particularly for Key Stage 3 pupils. So we do a lot of that in PSHE. Sometimes it's a national curriculum. I'll say sometimes, for me as a leader in a school, really, I think maybe the core subjects, but within everything else, I think it's really open to debate. And particularly, I've been working with my geography leader, and the first question I asked him, I think it's a great question to ask, is why is geography important? And that's the first question, and that's how the conversation went. We had a morning, it kind of went out from there, and he started talking about the environmental issues. But if you look at the Key Stage 2 curriculum, it's very hard, it's hardly even thought of in our curriculum, but it is in ours now. Even though it's not big in the national curriculum, it's absolutely central to ours because we believe that's important. The quote I got below is because that annoys me. I put that there not because it's best practice, because it annoys me. The best which has been thought and said in the world. The first time I heard that quote was from that person that I said I wouldn't mention before. His first name's Michael. It didn't actually come from him. It came from someone in 1869. I can't remember who it was. But who decides what's best? I think the school or the organisation is in the best position to decide, but also ask the students as well. How is your learning? I think there is a good. It is good to ask the students, but they perhaps won't know. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. Teachers' knowledge as well. That used to be very out of fashion. You can't just base a curriculum or a scheme of work just on what the teacher knows. But I do think if a teacher has particular knowledge of a historical era and they really love it, I think that enthusiasm is really going to come across. And when I was a primary school teacher in history, I love Isambard Kingdom Brunel. He's not one of my heroes. I really embedded that into the Victorian era, and we made. It was a bit dangerous. Don't do this because it didn't quite work out for me. But we did make a suspension bridge like the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, and we used some of the gymnastics equipment and rope and stuff like that. And at one point, the gymnastics equipment tipped over. A bit dangerous. So risk assessment. If you want to do that, go for it. It's definitely a risk assessment. But also, I think enjoyment is a purpose. That's how hobbies are formed. Some students just love art or they love maths. That's enough for them. Don't forget that as well. But just always know why. Always know why. I get the classic question all the time in maths. Why do you have to learn algebra? My stock answer, which is rubbish, is because it's beautiful. I just stole an answer from Brian Cox there. He thinks everything's beautiful. But actually, it made me think it's really difficult to say why algebra is really important. But one, it's an extension of it's just an extension of calculation. But actually what we did, spoke to the math leader, we brought in some algebra tiles, we use it with shape, we go outside, and we just make it more enjoyable and more engaging. So yeah, it's a good question. I've not quite got the perfect answer yet as well. The other thing I try to avoid, so the next slide, I suppose, is relatively controversial, I suppose, because these are just my thoughts, which are not necessarily right. This idea of 21st century skills, I've never got anybody really to tell me what that means. And they'll say, well, it's the scale of discernment. I said, well, couldn't you do that in 1980? Surely you needed it then. I don't think these kind of debates are helpful. I think there's lots of skills that we needed in 1600 that we need now. That might be debating, it might be evaluative skills. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, all those skills will never go out. I don't say out of fashion. They'll always be useful. They'll always be useful. And the other ideas then, well, preparing students for jobs that don't exist. I can't disagree with that. But then what do I teach them if I don't know what they're going to do? We still have to decide what our curriculum is going to be. We sort of think, well, I'm teaching history. How do I make it really, really useful? We make it useful by making sure they know lots of knowledge, but then they can use it. And that might mean a debate, which hopefully they'll be able to use in any job. And then the other thing now is artificial intelligence. 5 years ago, I was teaching students how to do really good Google searches. They don't need to do that now. They just use AI. And they're all into it, particularly year 7 and 8. But then the argument might be, well, you need to teach AI, but that'll be different in 5 years. So for me, AI, I think the best place to talk about AI is within the reading curriculum. Put some stuff in AI, read it, critically evaluate that reading, do some predictions. Do you agree what's coming up with AI? I mean, ChatGPT is the one I use. It almost feels old-fashioned already. So I think if we start getting bogged down in that, we end up in a cycle of never choosing anything. And I also think, and I do see this on LinkedIn as well, tell me what you see. It's that Victorian classroom. And they always argue, well, it's no different now. And I think that's a fair argument. But again, it takes us into a tailspin about, the curriculum isn't fit for purpose and all this sorts of stuff. And we get into debate without deciding anything really. And I'd agree some classrooms in my school look a bit like that. Some are in tables so they can work together. So that's possibly a major change. But I dare say a dentist in 1950 looks very similar to a dentist in 2023. A library looks the same. Loads of things look the same. So I think some people might call it a straw man argument. You're creating that picture just to create an argument that isn't really there, just to prove a point that doesn't really work. That's only my view. Because and my big change and my philosophy of education, I used to really buy into this 21st century skills idea. But I think that will come through a really effective curriculum anyway. So yeah, I think it's the other argument is traditional progressive teaching. I think there's room for both. I think there's a middle ground. I don't worry too much about those debates. So you've chosen content. Cue the crap picture of the shopping basket represents all that knowledge that you want to take forward. Now, how do you organize all that knowledge? What's it look like actually on a bit of paper so that a teacher or a trainer can actually make sense of it? So some principles that I use that I think are really important is making sure that new knowledge is built on previous knowledge. Again, deeply embedded, that is into cognitive load theory. We don't learn in islands. We don't learn something on its own. It's always connected to an old schema or something that's inside our heads. And I'll give you, again, a concrete example. I was teaching angles to year 7s. I think it was quite a tricky group, year 7s, I was at the moment. And I thought, how do I engage these students in learning angles? And I thought, well, one of the problems with angles is the misconception that an angle is where two sides meet, and it isn't. That's the vertex. I know I'm getting a bit boffiny about maths now. Angles is a measure of turn. And I thought, rally drivers turn. And a rally driver have a very systematic way of describing how they turn a car. So we looked at some YouTube videos, and they have a system of 1 to 6, where 1 is quite a little bit of a turn, 6 is a really sharp turn, and the co-driver's talking to them, and we talked about that. And I said, well, we don't have that system of 1 to 6 in maths. We have a system called degrees, and that measures the turn. And all of a sudden, I know it's very stereotypically, but this is what happened. Only all the boys who are playing on those Xbox games of racing games, makes sense now. And they're hooked. You give it real purpose. I was building on their prior knowledge of driving games. So when I talk about previous knowledge, I'm not just talking about previous knowledge within the curriculum, but within their wider lives as well. But also having an eye on what's that knowledge supporting in the future. So with those angles, what's going to happen next? So I know what's going to happen next. I'll use those angles to construct shapes. So it's having that sequence that it all builds on one and builds toward the next. And then those schemes and lessons are planned sequentially and that kind of logical order. The other thing that, and I did this is just a slide from the next slide, some training that I did. There's kind of two types of sequencing, I think. Some sequence is hierarchical, and I think that's quite simple to put together. So, for example, maths is hierarchical, reading is hierarchical. And in reading, you'll start with picture books, making sure the books are right way up, talking about what they see. And then we build in phonics, and then we build in that vocabulary and that inference, and it all, it gets naturally more complex as you go along. There's nice steps, as it suggests on the left-hand side. On the other side, it's kind of like a story. So those stepping stones, not one stepping stone's more complex than the other or harder than the other. And the example I give there is geography. So what do I learn first? Do I learn about the coasts or do I learn about rivers? I don't think it really matters. To me, it's logically to learn about rivers first because they go into the coasts. But as long as the geography leader can tell me why they put it in that order, I don't really care. I don't run geography. That's up to them. But it's still having that idea of logic behind it. So, and it is one of the trickiest things I think of curriculum planning. Why have you put it in that order? So we've worked hard now to put our history curriculum into chronological order. One year isn't more important than the other, so it's not a hierarchy, but we want history to really tell the story. I also think there's an argument that it doesn't need to be chronological. Our brains don't work chronologically. We don't remember things chronologically, but we just want to tell the story of history of what we provide in history. And what I'm going to do now, one of the things I'm really passionate about is having that balanced curriculum. So I'm really proud that from years 5 to 8, all of our students have 1 hour of music a week. So I'm going to show you some documents now from our music curriculum, just to show you how we've organised, how we've structured the curriculum at a strategic level. So thinking about our stakeholders, this is what goes on the website. This is for our parents, so they can know. It's quite a basic road. I'm sure you've seen these road maps. There's nothing particularly innovative here, I don't think. But one of the things I've really encouraged the music leader to do, if you look up there, I'm just pointing to it now. We teach the students ukuleles in year 5. It only ever used to be in year 5. And I said to Beth, the music leader, so what happens then? What happens to ukuleles? Where's the sequencing? Where's the progression in playing the ukuleles? And then she's gone away, thought, right, we're going to put it into year 7 again. So they start the ukuleles in year 5 and they return back to them in year 7, obviously at a more complex level. And that part of that curriculum is quite hierarchical. We also do keyboards as well. So we're really passionate about teaching our students 2 instruments. Really important to teach them 2 instruments. Again, why? Context of the school. We've got some students quite affluent and could go away and have music lessons privately. We've got some students that will never have a chance to play an instrument. We provide them with that. So that's why we've chosen that. So that's kind of where we take our students at a more strategic level for the staff. So they've got a tool on which to build their schemes of work. This is an example of one of our progression maps. So every curriculum leader plans like this. When I talked about the template, and having that consistent model across the curriculum, this is how we came up with it. So I'll start with the ones that are highlighted in, I think that's turquoise. I'm not an art teacher. We call them strands. National curriculum calls them strands. However, we haven't just taken them from national curriculum. We've based them on our own expertise. So 4 important strands in music: performing, composing, and listening, and instruments. And the instruments one came much later because we play instruments. So I thought, well, I want progression of instruments, and I want to show me how that goes through. What does it look like in year 5? What does it look like in year 8? And how much more complex will it be? but also getting back to that declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. We call that know that. So they're composing. There it says, I'm pointing, you can't see me pointing. All pieces of music have to be composed and put together. That's not obvious to a year 5 student. So we take nothing for granted, and that's one of the powerful messages from declarative knowledge, that we don't take anything for granted. You know, we don't just go straight into the actual procedural, you know, process of composing. They need to know they are composing. That's really important to us. So yeah, that's a typical view of one of our progression maps. Some of you will be thinking, you know, about Ofsted, but Ofsted has seen these, and I'm not saying they passed the test. I know they're good, because you know we've worked really hard as a collaborative team to do that. What happens next is, I'll talk about Beth, because she's our music leader and she's brilliant. We use knowledge organisers. Why do we use knowledge organisers? Predominantly for me, they're a curriculum planning tool for the leader. So on that knowledge organisers, we say, and it's a pretty arbitrary figure, whatever's on that knowledge organiser, we want our students to remember for the next 10 years. We say 10 years because that's how knowledge organisers started. I'm not saying you have to have these. We find them useful. They do go in the students' books or files. We do refer to them. This is very typical. This is the year 5 knowledge organiser, the very first one they do. And you can see we look at the history of music, so that they know music actually follows chronology and changes as we go along. So it isn't just there. Why did we put that in? We always felt that sort of the social media, they just think music just happens. I was singing something the other day to my daughter, because I don't know why. She said, how do you know that song? So what do you mean? So that's on TikTok. I said, oh, it's 20 years old. They all think music just happened in the last 3 or 4 years. So we want to take them back about some of the history of music. But also in year 5, it's really important they get the really key concepts of music, like rhythm and tempo, texture, because those will build as we go through the entire curriculum. So yeah, that's how we structure our curriculum. So I'll give you a little opportunity now to put something in the chat. Is there anything in there, Kayleigh?
Got one. What considerations do you take into account in terms of staff skills, resources, and financial implications when planning a new or different content?
Yeah, so where we're really looking, I think that's such a good point. So I'll kind of do the staffing first. We're really lucky that in a middle school we have subject expertise, so that helps a lot. But actually, that doesn't mean they'll know everything. So, for example, the ukulele, Beth can play the ukulele, and that goes back to, you know, using the skills of the staff. So it does have to be taken into consideration. I'm sure there'll be some people on here who are primary school teachers. That's a lot harder. That's a lot harder, because rarely in a primary school, because I did 10 years in a primary school, my experience is rarely would you have a music specialist. So that's, you know, what I would recommend there is to buy in a scheme, you know, because you have to, but make sure you talk to the scheme provider before you actually go and buy it, have a webinar with them, talk to them. In terms of finance is really tight in schools at the moment. It really is. So I don't really deal too much with that side of things. But one of the other reasons we chose a ukulele is because they're cheap to buy. You can get a ukulele for 20 quid, and so a class set, still £600, but £600 for a whole set of instruments that are going to be used by 400 students. So we found that's really good value for money. The other thing, and I think this, you know, we're sailing into leadership as well, aren't we? We ask our curriculum leaders, we don't say, here's your budget. We say, what do you want and why do you want it? Now, that's taken quite some time to put in place, because yes, it's kind of a wish list, but they need to justify why they want it. So it makes leaders, I think, really be careful about what they're spending. And so far, that works. Have I answered everything there? Or
yeah, no, I think that covers it really. Thanks, Lee. And that's
budgets are a huge consideration as well. If you're part of a trust, I think that's helpful. one of our next steps really is to use. I mean, I suppose it comes into this question actually. So there's a history association, there's a geography association, there's a PSAT association. I think they're a good idea to join those associations because you get that specialist support as well. But it can be quite expensive to do that as a single school. So if you have an access through to the CEO of a MAT or one of the directors, suggest that that's done as a whole multi-academy trust. The associations are really good. Some are free as well. So there's one called Best Evidence Science Teaching Best. They're free. They've got amazing stuff on there, and they go right from primary all the way up to secondary as well. So yeah, there's loads of freebies out there, but some of the stuff does cost. Is there anything else on there?
Nothing else in the chat for now, Lee.
Okay, so I think I'm going to get through this. I hope I haven't gone too quick. I know there's a lot, but we're really looking at a strategic level. So the next bit is that craft of engineering the learning, and I just like that kind of phrase really. So the teaching and learning, Ofsted might call it the implementation. What's it actually look like in the classroom, and how do you make decisions about what the pedagogy should look like? Because again, I did actually come off Twitter because I was fed up of people being really horrible with each other about traditional versus progressive teaching strategies and teaching models. And I found the progressives are a bit woolly and fluffy, and the traditions were very, very aggressive. And I thought, I don't want to be part of this because I think there's room for everything. So, my view of being a traditional teacher would be that direct instruction, where I suppose the teacher's very clearly in charge, I suppose. In charge is perhaps not the best. The teacher's very clearly structuring that learning, modeling that learning for the student or for the delegates. And then that progressive idea is maybe where they're simply facilitating conversations, or they might give them the text for the students to find out for themselves. And I think there's room for both. I think in the UK at the moment, we're very big, I suppose. We're very influenced by that direct instruction model, which I think is really useful in places, definitely. We might associate coaching and mentoring with that progressive model or collaborative learning, but I think there's room for everything. I think there's room, for lots of different ways. But what I want to just talk about now is, how do you decide? You've got this lesson, you're going to teach this outcome. How do you know which is the best approach? Do I need direct instruction? Is it a lesson where I can just facilitate learning? So what I share with my staff is this sort of model. So if you think about it as a continuum, so you've got direct instruction, which is really, the teacher's got a real hold on this lesson, all the way to facilitation, where it's really kind of owned by the students. I know that's not a perfect definition, not at all. How do we decide where to pitch it? And again, I come back to cognitive load theory, John Swaller's theory. There's some really fabulous pieces on there online. And I think this is a really good reason. I think, right, where do my students fit so far in this scheme of learning? Are they still novices and they know very, very little? Which, I was teaching students yesterday, actually, something called prime factor decomposition. They've never heard of it at all. So I said, well, they're novices here. They've never heard that phrase. It's very new. There's a lot of prior learning skills to apply to it, but the actual concept of that was really, really new and unique. But sometimes they might come with expertise. It might be the 5th lesson. And when I say an expert, I don't mean, they can come and teach the lesson. I mean, they're pretty competent, or they might have a big word in education. They might have some real mastery over it. Don't ask me for a definition of mastery. I've never heard a good one yet. So, but they might have a real handle on the ideas. They might have a real handle on Henry VIII and his wives and how it fits in with the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church. What happens then? So I think new learning should come down here. You know, if they're a novice and it's new learning, I think direct instruction should be really quite your go-to, at least to start with. And one of the pieces of research we use for our teaching and learning policy is Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction. I know it's used particularly in sport as well, I think, for coaching and sport. I know someone at Loughborough University he's big into coaching, and he coaches teams and he uses that as a model. So that's a really good model, but it also works, you know, when you're teaching phonics. If, however, they're an expert, there's still room for direct instruction. But if the expert, the person who's running that classroom, really wants to deepen that learning, so you want to make them even more. It's about, you know, remember the old iceberg? What's really underneath this learning? What's really underneath Henry VIII's decisions? Why did he reform the church? What did that mean for society? Rather than just knowing that he did. The other thing, this isn't read for no reason. I looked at this last night. I thought, oh, it's in red. It looks like it's bad. No, but I think if they're an expert, or if they've got some really good handle, facilitation's a really great way, and we should be making room for that for students. And I think in maths that might look like problem solving, although I still think problems need to be taught, but then they'll go away and solve some problems for themselves. And then also, if there are novices and you want to use facilitation, discovery-based learning, if you read the cognitive load theory stuff, it's not very big in cognitive load. It's something to keep away from. I think one of the issues of discovery-based learning is, particularly for younger students, and particularly for novices, there's so much room for misconceptions. And they just kind of, if you go back to that lesson I taught yesterday, prime factor decomposition, there's no amount of discovery that will get them to that. So they just wouldn't be able to work it out for themselves. It's a complete mystery to them. They need that expert in the room, which happened to be me, trying my best anyway, to teach them that first before they could go on to more facilitation. And in cognitive load theory, we would call that direct instruction, that borrowing and reorganizing. Most knowledge we have is borrowed from another human being, but we reorganize it and make it our own. So that's, you know, our teaching and learning policy. You know, where does it live within those 4 quadrants, really? And again, this is me being self-critical, you know, self-critical. Actually, I think that's where our teaching and learning policy is now. I think it's too far to the right, you know, and my next stage for my staff really is to move it over here a little bit. I want students to have more opportunity for that self-led. That's just my philosophy, because I want them to become a bit more independent. And I think by doing too much direct instruction, they don't become as independent as we want. It's almost like the idea behind direct instruction is to make it self-redundant. We teach it really well, so it doesn't need to be taught again. Just some of my thoughts. I'm just going to go back a couple of slides. Yeah, talked about where it lives in those 4 quadrants, but really importantly, how I'll make sure all the staff take an important role in shaping that. Because I have my views, but there's 25 staff in my school who are all brilliant, so I want to listen to them. And again, that critically evaluating the teaching and learning policy. I'm really proud of our teaching and learning policy, but again, I just want it moving that little bit. And I've talked about it at multi-academy trust level, because I lead on the curriculum network, and we are concerned, I suppose, not just in our trust, but in education generally, that we've lost a bit of that. The students have lost a bit of that independent learning. You might not be finding that. I find that just that little bit. So yeah, and I think that's pretty much brings me to the end. So I'm going to stop sharing now, so you can perhaps see my face a bit better if you really want to. Okay, so if you've got any questions, I'm open to being attacked. Go for it.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Lou. That was absolutely fantastic. So I don't know if you can see the chat now that you've stopped sharing, but I'm going
to click on the chat now. Yeah, I can see.
We've got a couple of questions in there, so I don't know if you want to maybe have a crack.
Yeah, let's have a look. So do you see a curriculum as a working document? Definitely. Oh, 100%. We're reviewing them all the time. I drive the staff crazy because I don't. It's a constantly moving vehicle, really, and particularly, yeah, for those gaps in learning. And the gaps in learning, there's an interesting point. That's why the progression maps are so important. So if there's a gap in learning as a teacher, you can go back and right, there's a gap here. What should they have known in year 5? Let's look at that first. And we always start schemes of learning in that way as well. What are the gaps? And I still think, yes, we're 2.5 years past lockdown, 2 years, something like that. There's still gaps. We're finding that, I teach 7 and 8 math, and there's still gaps. We're still practicing times tables. We're still practicing basic addition. Which category does teaching with illustrations using familiar? So I don't like photosynthesis, efficiency, physical chemistry. I don't quite understand that, but we do use a lot of pictures. I suppose you might look at dual code theory. That's a useful one for looking at illustrations. The one thing I will say with illustrations, I know I go on about cognitive load theory, which taught me so much, is I showed you an illustration of a bike. And what I forgot to say is actually that illustration is quite rubbish. When you're labeling something with an illustration, try and fit the label next to what you're trying to illustrate. So if you've got a picture of a plant and you want to label the leaf, put the label on the leaf, not on an arrow away from those. I know it's such a tiny thing. It's incredibly important. It's incredibly important. How long did it take to implement all of this from the beginning? So what I'm really pleased with it, when Ofsted went gung-ho on curriculum, we'd already started, so I was quite pleased with it. I was a bit, bit smug about that. So actually, where we're at now, if you look at the music curriculum, that's 5 years in. So it takes time. It takes time. So, yeah. How do you plan for differentiated learning? Yeah, they're really good question at the moment, because one of the things we're working at is particularly for our more able learners. So I think the differentiation, it's so difficult. So we've joined NACE, which is a National Association for Children, for more able children in education. They're really useful. And that's a work in progress, because I think you've noticed from particularly the knowledge organisers, they're not differentiated. So we're looking at that now. So we're looking at, we're going to go back and look at a knowledge organiser and think, what does that look like for our more able learners? But then at the other end, at the SEN students, what do we put in place for them? So our teaching learning policy makes specific reference to scaffolding. So what we try and give, as much as possible, all the students have the same task. It's the scaffolding that's different. It's a very idealistic way of looking at it, but it's deeply ingrained in our philosophy of inclusion. But it doesn't always work. That will work for 95% of students. There'll always be 5. So if you think about a teaching and learning policy, that won't work for everyone. No policy works for everyone. You've got to be prepared to adapt. So yeah, that's a good question though, and it's funny how these questions come up into things we're thinking about at the moment. But it takes a long time to implement, and it's definitely a moving document. The other thing we're trying. Sorry,
Lee, I was just going to say, I think this is a topic that could continue for, we could talk about it for days, couldn't we, really? There's so many, parts to pull into it, isn't it? And, as you said about the Dunelm thing earlier, it sort of, it really sticks, doesn't it, that there is so many things to consider.
Yeah, there is so much, really. There is so much, and pushing the more able, there's so many different ideas in different schools. So some schools say, well, the more able then can go and teach the others. I've not seen any great research about whether that actually works. The more able students really like it. It gives that responsibility, and that in itself's learning. That's sort of that spontaneous curriculum. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not sure whether it really does secure their learning. And it is hard, because even now I'm teaching 21 years. I still get those. I finish and I think, I haven't got anything ready for it. But luckily, when you're 21 years in, you can think of something pretty quick. Sometimes you can be quite systematic about it, and it's another idea. So having 4 or 5 set tasks that will fit any subject. So for example, what were the 3 most important words that you used today? and why, and explain that in writing. So there's different things you can do, but differentiation, which I still don't think is a dirty word. Some people think it is. Oh, we don't use that word now, but it's a reality of the classroom. All students come from different backgrounds, have different prior knowledge. So, is your shopping shop? Oh, it's Aldi. Shopping shop Aldi or M&S? No, it's Aldi. Although I do like the M&S do some really nice cookies. I think what are those cookies that I like? My partner gets them for me. So yeah, I know Ofsted don't like differentiation, but they're not allowed to not like it because it's really a philosophy of pedagogy. So yeah, they don't, because they'll say the curriculum doesn't meet the needs of all learners. They don't. Just call it adaptive teaching. They're okay then, because you are adapting. So I know adaptive teaching is meant to happen more in the moment, but yeah, there is a recording. Adaptive teaching is really hard. I think you have to be incredibly skilled as a teacher, and again, teachers are at different levels, aren't they? They're at different levels. We've got some teachers who've been doing it 3 years. We've got some teachers who've been doing it 35. Two people are laughing at my idea of adaptive teaching. Good, because I think there's so many words. There's so many cliched words that we use all the time. Yeah, and I hope you're not in schools where teaching's judged as well. I've not judged a lesson for about 10 years, thankfully. There's a great webinar I listened to. It was Johnny Wilkinson on the High Performance Podcast, and he talks about there's no good or bad, right or wrong. There just is. So when I do feedback for lessons, this is what I saw, and this is what the student said, and ask them why you chose that activity and why you chose that question. That's how we move people on. And Dylan Williams said, what makes a good teacher? The ones that want to improve. That's it. Simple as that. So yeah, it is a remix of the words. It is the same concept. Adaptive teaching is differentiation. And there used to be a big push, didn't there, on closing the gap. So students will come with a gap, and I think the gap really does open at age 2 and 3. More that, so they're going to come with a gap, and we've got to close the gap. But actually, by closing the gap, you've almost artificially got to hold back your most able. It's a ridiculous state of affairs, really. So yeah, any more? Okay, thank you.
No more in the chat. No, nobody's got the hand raised, but that was absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Leigh. Really appreciated. As we've said, hopefully I haven't frozen again. I do apologise about that.
I don't think you did. No.
But
someone there. Sorry, I've just noticed this. Anna Layla Pace. Someone with the same surname as me. It's not often I see that. It's a cool surname, that is. Well done.
You're the new favourite person.
Yes, yeah. Although my surname is pronounced Pace because I'm Italian. Wow. It's not Pace. Pace.
I wonder if I've got Italian roots.
Yeah,
or you might have English roots. Who knows? I want Italian one. That's a lot cooler, I'd say.
It's a great surname because in Italy I'm Pace. Here I can be Pace. I can't pass for English.
I might tell the students I'm Mr. Pace. Sounds a lot cooler. When I go into reception classes, they say, "Do you like toothpaste?" I thought, "Oh, I've heard this 1,000 times." Yeah, yeah. 4-year-olds, 4 and 5-year-olds, they still scare me. And I'm in there tomorrow. Much for the year 8 lesson. So.
No, as I say, thank you so much. The recording will be emailed to everybody as well. And everybody who registered, for people who couldn't unfortunately attend with us today in case they got caught up. Maybe some of them are still teaching. I did have a couple of emails, Leigh, just to say that they were still teaching, unfortunately, so they couldn't attend live. But they did really want to see it. So the email will be sent out to everybody. But as I say, any more questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or get in touch with us afterwards. More than happy to answer anything. But Leigh, thank you so much. It is really appreciated.
Just look me up on LinkedIn if you want as well, and fire away.
He's an influencer, everybody. Honestly.
Right. Yeah.
No, it is really good for, I suppose, as you say, just them questions and sparking that bit of debate and curiosity. I think, which is, I think, as you've said, the main the main
Yeah,
point of all
definitely,
this,
yeah.
isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you.
Right, perfect. Thank you so much, Lee.
All
I'll let you go. Thank you
All
so
right,
much,
thank you.
everybody, for joining. It's really appreciated.
Enjoy your evening. It's cold out there. Put your hat